My finals week, I called my parents. I said, listen, I think I'm in some kind of trouble here. I don't know what's going on, but I want you guys to be here. My parents drove 2.5 hours to get here. We went to the meeting, and they wouldn't let us videotape the meeting. They didn't want any record of this meeting. It was myself, both of my parents, the Director of Judicial Affairs, Ardith Tregenza, and the Vice President of Student Affairs, Cornell Morton. He referred to me as an identifiable young white male member of the Cal Poly College Republicans. And he says, although it's not exclusively white or male, there's some implications. You know, a white male, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, that was a flashpoint for these students' anger. That was the exact word. Just me being white, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed, that I was somehow prone to offend people that didn't look like me. We're all students of the same age. We all go to the same school. There was more the same about us than was different. I've never thought, okay, this person doesn't look like me, they're automatically going to hate me, or they're going to not like me, or I'm going to somehow just offend them by being in their presence. At one point, he suggested to my parents, he looked at my dad and suggested that I was maybe raised in a manner to not treat other people respectfully. They wanted me to see a university psychologist to discuss emotional barriers. I have some emotional disorder because I'm conservative. Something's got to be wrong with me. You need to write letters of apology to these students and make an appointment with a psychologist. They handed me a sheet which listed everything from verbal reprimand all the way to permanent expulsion from the CSU system. Your punishment could get worse.
And policies that are supposed to be ensuring tolerance and diversity are instead being used to silence people with alternative views. Race, class, and gender issues are being used as ammunition in an all-out political war. And what's at stake is nothing less than the once great marketplace of ideas, the American university. In the 1960s, protesters fought for their right to free speech. But today, protesters are fighting to shut down other people's speech. This happens frequently whenever someone disagrees with the dominant campus thinking on matters of racial politics. Just ask Ward Connerly. For years, Ward Connerly has opposed the racial preference system of affirmative action. As a member of the Board of Regents, he was instrumental in getting racial preferences banned within the University of California. More recently, he brought the fight to Michigan, but apparently, not everyone there thought he had a right to speak. Fears for his safety required a huge security detail, and throughout his speech, he was repeatedly shouted down.
How come you're so two-faced?
It troubles me to see a black man stand in front of me and speak out against affirmative action.
It bothers you that a black man would be against your point of view. If that isn't saying...
Yep, 50 years after the start of the civil rights movement, and some people on campus still believe that blacks don't have the right to think as individuals.
If you question the traditional ways of doing things, then almost immediately you're characterized as an enemy of your group. You're seen as an inauthentic black. You're not really black. You know, you're an Oreo or Aunt Jane or Uncle Tom. People in academia would expect me to support affirmative action.
Back in 1998, when racial preferences were banned at the University of California, and I was at Berkeley, I lost count of how many conversations I had with people where they quite simply assumed that I was against the ban.
A lot of white people will say, well, how dare you criticize affirmative action?
It was just assumed, especially because I'm black. People would come to my office door shaking their heads about the ban. It would never have occurred to anybody that I might have a different view.
I've applied for grants, and I've been told that the reason I didn't get those grants was that I oppose affirmative action.
There's a presumption about black students. There's a presumption that black students are homogeneous. A black student who comes into a classroom could be from Harlem, could be from Dominican Republic, could be from Brazil, could be from Africa, or it could be from an affluent elite family or a very poor one. We don't really know.
Black people are poor, and that therefore you can't expect them to make top grades and scores. Well, that's extremely unreflective. All black people have not been poor for many decades now. They never were, but the idea that black and poor are essentially the same thing is far out of date.
That's right. Not for hate speech.
Anti-racist.
People in this country actually appreciate free speech. Good. Oh, is that not free speech right there? Oh, good. Okay, cool. Good.
No dialogue with hate. No dialogue with hate.
No dialogue with hate. No dialogue with hate. No dialogue with hate. No dialogue with hate. No dialogue with hate. No dialogue with hate. No dialogue.
That if a state chooses to provide that kind of subsidy for people who are in the country illegally, there we go, then they will have to do it for all the people who are also not state residents, but anybody who wants to come, as is presently.
All right.
No, that's not fair. That's not fair.
Listen, this is the United States. This is the United States where people can speak freely without being harassed. That's no. That,
You don't like what I have to say, so you try to like what you're doing.
that doesn't give you the right to silence his constitutional protection. All right. Somebody smashed in the window.
Thank you all for coming out. I want to start off by telling you that I think it is probably a good idea, and I try to give this advice at most of my talks, it's probably a very good idea when somebody stands in front of you and is proclaimed by virtue of their bio and by virtue of their curriculum vitae, their resume, that part of which is read to you, by way of the nice comments made about them by others, proclaimed to be an expert. It's probably a very good idea to ask yourself why it is that you're listening to that person and not somebody else. In this culture, we are led to believe that if someone stands before you, a proclaimed expert, that it must be because they are indeed the brightest bulb in the box, that they know something that the other people don't know. I am not standing in front of you, and you are not listening to me because I am the most informed person in the country on racism or white privilege, not because I'm the best speaker on those subjects. I am fairly good, and I intend to demonstrate that to you amply in the next hour. It is not because I'm the best writer on the subject, though I am okay with that as well. It is instead because I, and I know this, fit the aesthetic that is needed on too many campuses and too many communities around the country in order to come in and to give this talk. Nothing that I am going to say tonight, or at least very little, originated in my head. Nothing, or at least very little, of what I say tonight is in fact new. Almost every single thing that I'm going to say this evening is wisdom that has been shared with me either patiently or sometimes not so patiently by people of color who have in almost every instance forgotten more about the subjects of racism and white privilege since breakfast yesterday than I will likely ever know. And yet they will not be asked to give 85 engagements around the country this year or next on this subject. Not because they have not the wisdom to do it, but because privilege, the subject that I'll deal with tonight, bestows upon me that advantage. And so as a matter of responsibility and accountability, I have to own that up front. How is it not an issue that according to that Justice Department report, while black and brown folk are having their wheel wells ripped apart on the side of the road, their trunks splayed open, their dashboards ripped apart in the search for drugs which aren't even there, white people like me, notice I said like me because I'm not trying to tell you anything about me that you don't need to know and for which the statute of limitations has not yet expired, are driving by the roadblock with a trunk full of weed, and we're just waving. Because we're not suspected, therefore we're not detected, therefore we're not punished. How is that not an issue? So people of color are going to have to know white history, white literature, white art, white theater, white poetry, white drama. I know we don't call it that. That's sort of the point. When your stuff is the stuff against which everybody else's stuff is compared and found lacking, you don't have to name it. It's just the norm. That's why, for those still confused, we don't have White History Month, because we have several. They go by the tricky names of May and June, July, August, September, pretty much any month.
Anti-racism is a code word for anti-white.
Then why do so many people want to come here if we're so bad?
Because there are places where they can do good here. If we allow for that to happen and we create change.
Change?
Change.
So that means a changing America. You want a changing
Of course America has to change.
Right. And you'd like the changing America to be the dominant people would be people of color.
That's going to happen anyway.
But you want it to happen, do you not?
That's going to happen anyway.
Do you not want it to happen?
That's going to happen whether you or I want it or not.
That's the bottom line on it, isn't it, Charles?
No, the bottom line
it is.
That you fear
I don't fear anything.
Your white privilege will no longer exist.
I just want the rule of law.
You
want a totally different country.
It's going to happen whether you like it or not, whether I want it or not. Look at New York City. The majority of the people in New York City are people of color. And that's why you have problems with immigration.
And that's
because
why
of the browning of America.
That's why
you want to stay in control.
Now,
you want to stay in power.
A new report out by the government shows that by the year 2042, white Americans will no longer represent the majority of the population. That prediction is 8 years sooner than previously expected.
The Census Bureau believes that by 2042, white Americans will make up less than half of the U.S. population. But with so many mixed communities, diverse families, and changing mindsets, Hesbiver believes that by that time, ethnic lines will be blurred.
Will we reach even a point at which we will say, these categories don't mean anything anymore?
Do I think white people will become a minority? When I say that, I include particularly the Hispanic population. And yet I'm not, they're really, as I understand it, that's not really a race. So when we talk technically race, that's wrong. It's just that Hispanic people are a protected class. Do I think white nationalists have a point in saying enough is enough when whites are now at 66%, when our founding fathers were at 100%? I guess I don't. I don't think they have a point. I don't appreciate those organizations. But to some extent, I guess I can appreciate maybe their people's sense of loss.
But in fact, white folks are starting to be a minority now.
You think white people like that?
Yeah, but seems like it's more Mexicans than white folks out here.
Just maybe someday it just means a completely blended group of people that nobody will be able to figure out what anybody is anymore.
Is that a good thing?
I think that's a great thing.
I think we are yellowing America and everybody's blending, and that, you know, I think that's a good thing.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think we got enough here. And just imagine how America's going to be 15 years from now.
Oh, I can see the potential for a lot of racial tension between blacks and Latinos. You're here bleeding our social services, you're using our hospitals, you're using this without contributing anything to our society.
They can come over here and don't even have to speak English. You know what I'm saying? If we're in their country, we would have to adapt.
The people who want to come to America, the people who want to come to America from Mexico, my feeling is, by God, let them in, you know?
Let them in?
Absolutely.
We've got some people saying that we've got to open up the door and allow more in. And
No, we
shouldn't.
shouldn't.
People saying that we should close the door and build a wall.
Close the door and build a wall.
And what's so bad about it, these Mexicans have more of an attitude. They're more arrogant than what a white man is.
So you say that the Mexicans are more racist than the whites?
Yes, yes, especially the ones with the big belt buckles and the reptile shoes.
You know, the United States lets 250,000 immigrants come in every year. It's more than any country in the world.
Correct.
So you think that's not enough? We're not being generous enough?
Well, I think we got too many already.
We got too many?
Too many.
If you were the immigration czar, what would you do? If you could give one order, what would it be?